Welcome back. This is part 2 of my in-depth study to Jim Lee's artwork for X-Men #1, where I will be trying to understand his artistic choices and create some sort of tutorial for us mere mortals to make artwork just as good as him. So this video will be split into these sections, where I will be applying what we've learned to this drawing that we started in the previous video. So let's get on to the learning. Step 1. Head construction. For the basic head construction, use whichever method works best for you. The reason being is that the construction method isn't going to be what makes your artwork look like Jim Lee's or not. It's the detail and the style that will. A common theme that you'll find throughout this video is that Jim will differentiate men and women with angles or sharp lines, respectively. This translates mainly to cheekbones and jawlines. Women tend to have softer curved cheekbones compared to males, which are much more sharp and angled. This is shown perfectly in this panel with Jean and Xavier, where we can see the stark differences between the both. Step 2. Proportions. Jim uses very typical proportions of comic artists. Women tend to have bigger eyes and lips than males, and us mere mortals for the most part. Men tend to have broader chins, and of course, everyone, including women, are ripped, beautiful, and have wonderful cheekbones. Step 3. Eyes. Females tend to have either more rounded and wide shapes, such as Rogue or Jean, or the opposite, more sharp almond shapes, such as Psylocke. Storm, as you'll see as a common occurrence in this video, has her own style of doing things. In this case, she has wicked eyeliner that only Storm has, in her Storm style. He gives female characters different levels of eye makeup, giving their eyes more thick outlines to help give separation from one another. In general, one thing that separates men and women is that women always have thicker eye outlines in general. Male eyes don't change as much as the women's. They tend to be sharper in shape and more angular. Jim also has no fear of changing the eye shape. What I mean by this is if the brow is fully down, he's very confident in changing the eye shape to compensate for that, and I wish I could say the same. One thing that does connect male and female eyes together is that the shape is rarely a fully lined whole shape. He often uses small line breaks, nearly always on the bottom lid. For those rare times where Jim does actually draw the whole eye in detail, it tends to be a close-up, or it could be if the character is wearing a mask, or the rendering dictates it so that the eye pops out. Not literally, but like stands out. Jim has an interesting use of not drawing pupils sometimes and just leaving a white space. This occurs mainly when characters are in the background, so I imagine this is his way of not clogging up the background. Or one time, unfortunately for Jean, the black block? The details of the pupil itself tend to be a bit fluid and hard to pinpoint a specific set of rules. The only common detail is that the outer pupil line is again, rarely a full circle. He has an excellent eye for the planes of the face. When characters are at an odd angle, he keeps in mind the curve of the eyes relative to the angle, which is something that I nearly always forget, so it's a good reminder. Now let's talk about teeth, mouths, and lips. And when it comes to male and females, it is a tale of two different worlds, so let's get into it. You'll notice that men very rarely have a full circle shape for the mouth drawn in, and they never have a full outer lip shape like the women. The males have a single line, creating a shape that is almost fully closed. There is quite often a small line break at the point where the lips meet, and this is the brightest spot of the light source, and typically fairly central. Now don't get me wrong, he does give men some shape to their lips, mainly by adding a little shadow below the bottom lip, which can be larger or smaller depending on the person's lip size, or the expression of the mouth and how stretched the lips are. If mouths are fully open, the back of the mouth can either be mostly inked with part of the tongue lit, or, quite often, not fully blacked out, and instead there's a really interesting gradual shading to give it depth. Now it's time to get your pearly whites out, because X-Men love showing off their teeth. both men and women have small details that are easy for us to pick up and use in our own work. It's quite common for just about everyone to be grimacing, and it is very simple to draw. The overall mouth shape is typically created with the corners of the mouth pointed down rather than central. And then the teeth are drawn in by using a curve inwards towards the mouth because teeth aren't straight. And it's important to note that these curves are not drawn for every single tooth, as that A makes them look really weird, and B makes them look more like monsters than people. However, in particularly gnarly scenes, Jim will add more teeth than usual, or he might add a thicker line weight to draw attention to the teeth. The simple rule is, the teeth towards the front are most likely towards the light source, the less detail there is. One detail to add is that typically, only men are drawn to have canines and the bottom gum line showing in this gritted, grimacing teeth position. It should also be noted that characters such as Beast and Wolverine have much more pronounced canines than other X-Men. Depending on the light direction in the scene, you can emphasize male mouths with a thicker line weight in the corners where the back teeth are. As for the women, their war faces aren't as emphasized, have less detailed teeth, and more emphasis is put on their lips and lipstick instead. An easy tip is if women are wearing lipstick, there's often a little tiny highlight, a patch of white to differentiate between glossy and non-glossy lips. Step 5. Noses. Men and women, once again, are on opposite sides of the coin, with men having much more detailed noses than women. Jim opts for heavier details on males, such as on the brow and the bridge, where he creates wrinkles and crinkles if men are frowning, and much more general definition to the nostrils and the bridge. Men often have more of the bridge drawn in, where it's common for women to only have a nostril and a small shadow, and sometimes they'll draw in the other nostril too, like so. One similarity between men and women, though, is that the bridge of the nose is very rarely a solid line. Jim tends to either break the nose up into multiple separate lines that give the illusion of connection, or use two lines, one from the brow and one from the tip of the nose. When he doesn't draw a bridge break, like before, the lighting is often harsh and he uses heavy blacks or rendering to emphasize the planes or the shadows of the nose. Facial hair. X-Men, to me, seems to be Jim's most stubble-focused issue so far in his career. Just look at this panel of Magneto and try and tell me it's not detailed with just about everything, including stubble. Using that panel, we can see Jim draws stubble lines in the direction of growth, and where there is an intense light, the hairs are either non-existent or they get shorter. In the shadows, these hairs become more dense and clumped together, and the stubble is actually used in negative space in the inking as well, which I find super interesting. Eyebrows. Jim's eyebrows are somehow very similar and completely individual to the character at the same time. Let me try and show you what I mean. They tend to follow the general taper of thick at the start, which is at the nostril line, thinner, then thicker yet at the halfway point, and back to a point. It's worth noting though, like I said in the beginning, Storm has her own set of eyebrows that nobody else has, and they tend to defy gravity. Magneto and others in Jim's work have more bushy and full eyebrows, with more details of individual clumps of hairs. To make each character's eyebrows individual to that character, he changes up the general shape, the thickness, and whether or not the hairs stand up. What is interesting is that sometimes when Magneto has his helmet on, his eyebrows in reality would be shadowed. However, they are often left white to give shape to his expression. Sometimes they aren't even coloured in at all, and they're left skin coloured, which is a bit perplexing. Now, for the quintessential Jim Lee details. And I'm not talking about rendering, as that will be in a future video. The simple way to sum up this section is that women, as before, as a trend in this video so far, have very few details to their faces, whereas men have often just as much detail as they can possibly cram in and make it look good. For women, the most detail he adds that isn't rendering is a line or two for cheekbones. On the other side of the coin though, Men have a heap of detail, so let's try and break that down into manageable chunks. Let's compare these male faces and see what we have in common. From this image, can you see what links all of these or some of these faces together? To start from the top down, Jim likes to add details across the forehead, and he varies it between creating stress lines in the centre above the nose, radiating across, like we can see in all of these, bar cyclops. Below the eyes, he adds in detail for the eye sockets, each one, bar and cyclops obviously, has lines emanating outwards, as well as tiny crow's feet that make them look extra intense. All of these have detailed tips of the noses, such as defined nostrils and random detail lines, and most of them have these little dimples that connect to the cheek. One funny thing is that I discovered that he loves to give people a tiny dimple in the middle of their chin, even though statistically it's quite rare for humans to have that. And just like the women, he loves to emphasize the cheekbones. Except in men, these are much more rendered with extra lines, because extra lines equals extra chisel in Jim's world. And that's it, that's the end of part 2 of exploring Jim Lee's world of X-Men. If you made it to the end, firstly, thank you so much for watching all of my video. Feel free to leave a comment down below whether you found this video helpful, if there's anything that you think I can improve on, or if there's something that I've missed out that you think the rest of us should learn. Until the next time, keep on sketching.